Shields and swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and placed, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Hello, minions. So I'm going to review for you today the film 1517 to Paris. But before I do, a little business to get out of the way. Some of you have noted that profawesome.com, the website, is down. Basically, when the Uber minions were decided that we needed to change our hosting, which was fine, we moved to a new host, which was fine, who then apparently lost all the data that was on there. So we have recovered part of it, but in part of that, discussing it with the Uber minions, we've decided that it's time to do an entire site redesign. So it's not going to go back up right away. I'm going to redesign the site. I'm going to try to make it more minion-centered so that we can have a little bit more of a community on there than we've had so far. Because up until now, it's been mostly me and other scholars sort of posting things for people to read with very little commentary. I want to make it much more interactive for the minions of doom out there, which would be you. So just keep your eye out for that. I'll let you know when it comes back up, but that's why it's gone. I really had not intended to. I intended to see the 1517 to Paris, but I hadn't intended to review it, but I thought I should review it just as an excuse to kind of let you know what was going on with the website and to keep you up to date about that. So the reason I hadn't intended to talk about it was that this has been a film which has not been well reviewed. It doesn't really fall under our usual purview here. Obviously, my own focus is specifically medieval stuff and medievalism. This clearly is not that. It takes place in 2015. And also, I branch out into general nerd culture. Again, this doesn't really fall into that. And I decided to see it, though, because in the theater, because this is maybe Clint Eastwood's last film. We'll see. I mean, he's in his late 80s. He's still making movies. He was behind the camera in this one. And he's done something really bold. And I don't think it exactly works, but it is worth seeing. And the thing that he has done is he has taken the three young men who were the actual participants and had them playing themselves in it. And I think the reason this is interesting is that largely that is a failure. The three young men are not great actors, which isn't a surprise because they are not essentially actors themselves. And to varying degrees, they're varying degrees of goodness and badness as actors. And I don't want to get into that. But I think what we do see in the film is sometimes we can denigrate acting as not as a craft, but just as pretty people looking at the camera and saying lines. And as my friends and I were discussing after the film, there were cases in which we did not believe these young men in the roles of themselves in a situation that they had actually been in, reading lines which presumably were things that they had said, and it was sometimes not believable. And so I just want to say, if you're interested in the idea of acting as a craft, this is a really interesting movie to see from that perspective, because these are earnest guys who are really, doing the best that they can, but you can't just turn on a dime and become a great actor. It's a craft that you have to build over time. More on that later on. So the story focuses on these three young men, and really one in particular, and it starts when they're in middle school and they first meet, and sort of as they go through their lives, how it leads them up to this moment. In a sense, one character in particular has a sense that his life is propelling him toward some moment and he doesn't know what it is. And in this case, this is to foil the terror stack. And so really we follow the protagonist, the main protagonist, through his life, starting in middle school, and we see time and time again it's about his failures. Failure after failure after failure. He's not doing well in public school. So he and his friends' mothers pull them out of public school. And then he's not doing well and take him to Christian school. But he gets into trouble there, and they meet the third friend. They're also, by the way, I'd like to point out that the Christian school seems to be entirely run by comedians. Like Tony Hale, for example, was a gym teacher. And I would have loved to go into that school, even though they're not playing it for laughs here. And then he ends up having to, because they get into so much trouble there, the one boy gets sent off to live with his dad. And then we sort of walk through failure after failure after failure, where he tries to succeed at something and he fails along the way. He tries to succeed and fails. But every time he fails, he learns something that he doesn't know is important to him. And the film, I think, does a really good and interesting job of showing how his cumulative failures work out to prepare him for this thing, prepare them all for this thing that they're going to do. The problem with the film, besides that they're not great actors, is the second act, the second half, really. The first half is sort of walking them through this, and then there's this sort of long delay. I didn't time it. I'm going to guess it's about a half hour, which is basically them wandering around Europe and the different things they see in Europe. It doesn't seem to have a particular point to it. It's not shot in really, really interesting ways. We don't still have the same theme of failure in it that we've had before. It may be that Eastwood's trying to set up a sense of normal life beforehand. If so, that's not clear. The other thing that might explain this is there's this, what appears to me to be an obvious allusion in the title to the film 3:10 to Yuma. Another film which is, you would think we have this sense of this impending time, right? The 3:10 train to Yuma. In this case, the 15:17 to Paris. If that's what Eastwood's going for, which I'm assuming he is, that doesn't really come across well. There's a sense that they're being propelled toward this moment, but there isn't a kind of counting clock, high noon style. There isn't this sense of getting there that way. There's a sense of a long sort of wait until their lives get to this moment. And so because of that, it felt to me like I would have been a lot happier if this film were maybe an hour long. Because what happens then in that long period of time is very little. And I don't know what it's trying to achieve for the film. And so if you don't see it in the theater and you watch it on video, I would suggest you can just, as far as I'm concerned, you can just sort of fast forward through that part. You don't need to see them wandering around Europe. I could in later days rethink that, but right now I don't see any purpose to that. And so the end result of, and then when we get to the final action scene that we're trying to get to, I have to say it is really well done. I think it's a tense and exciting moment. There are a couple moments where I laughed, and the moments I think were intended to be funny, or at least it broke up the tension, which suggests to me that there was tension. I already knew in advance how this worked out. This is an actual, not just a historical event, one that was just in the papers a couple years ago. We know that the actors play themselves, so they're not going to die. It was high profile, and there's only one guy that the three of them are fighting. So you would think that there's a lot of things mitigating against this being a tense and exciting moment. It is tense and it is exciting and it's very good, and so I did really feel like that moment was well shot. I feel like there's a shorter cut of this film, which was too short to be released as a feature film, which is just really excellent. Well, except for the acting. But let's return to that acting. What I find really interesting about this film is it gets to one of my favorite themes, which is failing your way to success, where we have a character who's failing and failing and failing and failing and failing, and every time he learns something new. And I was thinking about this leaving the theater, and how here are people who are not trained actors who have acted in this film where they played themselves, and the film has been largely panned in large part on the basis of their acting. They're just not good at it. But since the film shows how one learns through failure, and these guys have gone from nothing to being in a feature film directed by Clint Eastwood, I would not be surprised in the least if a decade from now we saw one or more of these three young men acting and doing a passable to good job, learning from this experience what they need to learn. And so, although the movie appears to be about heroism at first glance, I think it's really not about that. I think it's about responding to failure. How every time you fail, you persist and take with you what you have learned from that. And in that way, then, the 1517 to Paris, I think, in expressing that idea, was successful in that. So, that was the 1517 to Paris. I would recommend seeing it in the theater because, ghoulish as it might sound, might be Eastwood's last film. When you get to be, I think he's 88. When you get to be that age, you got to know that you don't have many more films in you. But there's nothing particularly large screen cinematic about it. So if you want to watch it in a few months on streaming or on DVD, I think that would be an excellent choice. You just need to know that it really drags in the last third before we get to the actual terrorist attack and that scene, and also that you need to be prepared for these guys with their first foray out in acting. So, one last thing before we go, Minions. I have been told that I need a sign-off or catchphrase to sign off. This was not a thing I thought I needed, but I have had a couple people say, you really need some sort of sign-off phrase. So, if anyone has any suggestions, I'm open to them. So, until next time, sign-off phrase.